This is the power plant for this building. When I say power plant, I don't mean electricity, I mean the most crucial function in terms of energy, which is heat. Electricity is nice to have, but it's not essential. This is crucial. This is probably the most important piece of technology in this building. This keeps this place from freezing, and it performs many functions just from stored dry solar energy. Heats the building, of course, that's its first function. It also dries wood if some of the wood got rained on a little bit or dripped on. Dries the building. We can bake in it, we can cook on it, and most excitingly, this retrofit, it heats all of our hot water. So this is a 40-gallon hot water tank that we just free cycled from my neighbor who was throwing it away. So we grabbed up this tank, hooked it to the back of this stove, which inside the stove has a water jacket that looks just like this, sitting right in the back of the firebox. So water from the cool side comes in the bottom, heats up. As it heats, it rises, and it comes up this 1-inch copper, and then it comes into the tank, and as it cools, it stratifies, and the denser water wants to sink, and you end up with this, what's called a thermosiphon, a convection loop. So there's no pump here. Key to having a really efficient wood-burning system is you need to have a relatively airtight stove. Mostly old wood cook stoves are super leaky, and they're really drafty, and you'll just rip through wood because you can't control the fire very well. You want to use really dry wood. That's key to having good combustion. And you want to burn it in a burner that's very much airtight, at least almost airtight, if not totally, where you can control the airflow. There's a myth, people always say, oh, you can have the wood too dry, it burns too fast if it's too dry. That's like the slug problem, right, that Mollison talks about. You need more ducts. Well, you need more air control if you're worried about burning your wood too fast. It means you have too much air coming in your fire, not your wood's not too dry. You just have no control over your airflow. You're asking a lot of the firebox to heat hot water without getting too detailed. The cleanest fire is the hottest fire, and you just send it right out. We're baking on it, and we're heating hot water, which is basically ice cold compared to the firebox. It's like 1,000 degrees in there. This is never more than 200. So that's freezing cold. That reduces combustion efficiency. So it's not the most efficient way to have a fire, like a rocket stove or a masonry heater with no cold side. The most efficient fire is completely insulated around it. But we're getting a key use out of it. So there's a difference between efficiency and effectiveness, right? That's a common pattern in resilient systems. Efficiency and effectiveness aren't the same thing. We ideally want a system as efficient as possible while being as effective as possible, but sometimes we need to consciously give up some level of efficiency to have something much more effective, like a wood burner that we can also cook on, bake in, and heat our hot water. Yeah, we give up a modicum of efficiency there, but we're way ahead of the game in terms of functions. So come on up this way, watch the top step, it's kind of a doozy. So this is the whole systems design studio. We built this 6-7 years ago now. We heat it on about 2 cords of wood. Less than that if we're not heating the hot water. This is 1,500 square feet, so that's pretty good performance. It's better than we expected it would be. There's only 8 inches of cellulose in the walls. There's 10 in the roof, which is not very much. There might be 12. The roof is either 10 or 12, I forget. But I would go more like 14 to 16 in the roof if you can. But there is a point, there's a sweet spot where you can go too far. The thicker your walls get, the darker your interior gets. It's just a relationship architecturally. So then you need bigger windows, or more of them, but better have bigger windows and less of them for a heat perspective. This is a breathable wall system in contrast to what a lot of people are doing nowadays. So far we've moisture tested it, and we've had very low moisture, like probably 5 to like 8% moisture, below 10 everywhere in the walls and roofs, so that's good. But one challenge is when you're insulating and you're making a very tight building, modern buildings that are very tight in a cold climate, is you have humid air generated. You're breathing, you're cooking, you might shower. That moisture is going to drive outward through your walls. There's more of a danger of your building rotting out from the inside, from moisture that's generated on the inside than from a leaky roof. Unless you're really derelict and not maintaining your roof. Buildings actually rot from the inside out or the ground up in this climate. So we tried to attack that by having some decent air detailing on the inside and ceiling, but more so by having a breathable wall system and also by having a very low moisture, relative humidity in the building. So we shoot to keep relative humidity below 35%. So in the winter, we crack a window up high and there's some gappiness by the door down low, so we're creating that convection loop of getting moisture out of here. Is that a little less efficient? Sure, but it's more effective. We've plumbed it for heat exchange. We put the piping in for it, figuring we might install it down the road, but we didn't install it, and I don't have plans to install it right now. That brings up one really key point, which is make your building as adaptable as possible. The adaptability of your building is super key. You can't underestimate, because it's super expensive and time consuming to like go through the wall, go through the roof. Then you have to rip up slate. You have to do all sorts of stuff. It's clay plaster, so it's locally sourced clay, not from on site, but from the area, and sand. Then it's clay painted, and that's about a 1/2 inch thick over most of it, at least. So I calculated there's over 5,000 pounds of clay and sand on the ceiling and the walls. Getting as much mass in your building as reasonably possible is key in a cold climate. You want a high insulation value building envelope, floor, walls, roof, and high mass in a cold climate. Those are key. And oftentimes it's the mass that's forgotten, because the mass is your thermal storage. That's your thermal flywheel, right? It absorbs excess heat, and then it can be a heat reservoir. So while we need buildings to live and survive and be comfortable in this very cold climate, we want to allow them to cut us off from the living biology of the world around us as much as possible. So one way of doing that is having wall systems that open and close very quickly, is having permeability and having a lot of indoor-outdoor space meshing. And French doors facing generally to the south is a pattern that's hard to beat in this climate. They might be on the east, they might be on the west. South works really well as well. You wouldn't want to put them in the north, of course. We've done as much thinking and spent more money on this building and time than like the whole rest of the landscape in a lot of ways. We can have hot showers perpetually for weeks and months, even if the grid is down and doesn't come back up. That's a nice resiliency metric, right? Because those systems are still functioning here. We call that passive survivability. It's just passive systems that are working when the fragile systems break, which I'm not planning on that happening often or a lot, but if it does happen often or a lot, or takes a while for those systems to come back up, we've established an infrastructure that can be robust in the face of bumps in the road with the larger infrastructure system of our society, which is very brittle in the way it's designed and mostly executed. Welcome to the machine, right? Welcome to the greenhouse. This is also performed a little bit better than we thought it would on most fronts. We built this 2 years ago. What do we see? Macro to micro, right? What about this place? Okay, south facing, so aspect, orientation. We're up against the slope, right? We're on a what facing slope? West facing slope. The building is oriented to the south. It's a pretty steep slope, so it gives us an opportunity to build into it really well. And then the building itself on the macro end is what you just brought up, is actually what, about 3 feet down into grade. Sinking it down 3 feet has done a lot for us, in addition, I think, to having a lot of vertical. Both in the winter, it's not frost prone, although we let this freeze intentionally to kill off a bunch of stuff that wants to eat everything, because greenhouses are notorious and they're definitely prone to pests. But in the summer, it's as valuable as it is in the winter for avoiding what? Cooking the plants, overheating, right? This does not want to get at about head level here. This pretty much chills out on most days with the vents open at like 95, 100. That's great. That's ideal in a greenhouse for plants. It's not, sounds hot, but it's really not. Well, the primary use of this building, and then I'll go over the vent system a little more. What's the most important reason to have a greenhouse in this climate?
Extending the season.
Season extension for your vegetable production primarily. So that's where it's really impacting your food security the most, is in the season extension. You're getting a jump on your veggie gardens by 2 or 3 months, right? So you're coming out swinging with big plants that are going to get way further in the short season we have. What's maybe a second great yield of a space like this? I think probably the second biggest yield for us is winter fresh food. which is kind of overwintering. We rescue kale from outside in November, bring it in already rooted, and put in like kale trees in here. And then we mine off of and harvest those greens, kale, chard. Mostly kale is the best stuff for us to do this with. And it doesn't grow from November, December, January. People like to think, oh, well, then you'll grow all year. We don't grow all year. We just harvest. We bring in tons of kale mostly, harvest from it, and then in February the sun starts coming out again a bit, and then it starts growing. But we have fresh, alive, living plants we can be pulling from all winter. This is a propagation facility too, especially on those shelves. You can stick cuttings in here, you can generate a lot of plants. It's also a great way in summer of having a serious yield in the summer of hot-loving plants. Peppers are just flowering outside this year. We're started the same date as these. These have been flowering for 2 months. They're just hitting their stride. In this season, in the hills here, in this climate, in the hills here, when peppers, we learned this for 7 years the hard way, as soon as peppers were hitting their stride outside and just starting to produce, it starts to get cold. It's like, no, sorry, you need 2 more months if you want a lot of peppers of heat. Here, we do have the 2 months. This is on an uninsulated barn, so there's insulation in there in this building, but there's just airflow behind it. If humidity gets through the wall, which is it's gonna happen, there's mice, things happen, walls shift, then it's in a barn. The humidity just gets out. It condenses, whatever, it's not a huge deal. If it's in an insulated shell envelope, you got problems there. So we decided to put it up against an uninsulated building. And that, I think, is the safer way to go. It's close. I mean, where are we relative location-wise? That's an important macro consideration.
Zone 1.
We're in zone 1. We're core, right in the center of these buildings, right? Greenhouse is like your most intense veggie garden. It's going to cook. If you leave the door closed, it's going to cook. Got to run out, open it. You got to harvest. You got to make sure stuff's not drying out. You want your greenhouse basically less than 10 steps away from where you are a lot, but probably not attached to your house in this climate, unless you have some very, very high perfection ways of getting around that.